Okay, so I have leftover tea. I thought I'd record another video. Um, Depression. Is it a disease? Let's talk about that. So I recently had a conversation with somebody from another country who they have a very different attitude towards health, towards mental health especially, and he asked me a bunch of questions about depression. And it occurred to me that maybe people don't know a lot about depression and would benefit from a video about it. So what is depression? Is it a disease? Well, no, because diseases are typically infectious and caused by like bacteria or viruses or something. Generally speaking, a disease is something that affects the immune system, right? And that's not how you get depression. That's not how depression happens to you. Maybe your immune system could be impaired, could be negatively affected by being depressed, but it's not an immune disorder. It's not, that's not what it is, okay? Um, is it a disease? Well, it is something that happens to you, rather than like something you cause yourself. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the causes of depression. It's kind of hard to say. There are studies that show that genetics play a role. You might be more likely to become depressed, and there is the idea that genetics can make you vulnerable to depression, but it doesn't guarantee that you have it. You need some sort of triggering life event or trauma or ongoing stuff that just gets you down over time and eventually you become depressed. But you need some sort of issue in your life, some sort of what they call a stressor to trigger your vulnerability, essentially. So it's the idea that maybe you've got a weak arm and then you never really notice that you've got a weak arm, and then one day you get punched really hard, or your arm snaps in half and falls off or something. That weakness was always there, but it just never really affected your life until a triggering event happened, and then the triggering event happens and there you go. And I don't mean triggered in the, oh, this really annoys or offends me. I mean like, wow, I got stabbed and now I'm afraid to go outside because I got stabbed outside. Or like a loved one has died and I'm grieving and it's really hard and I'm really struggling. Now it's not just grief, it's turned into depression. Or maybe you get raised and taught that mental health is a weakness and you should never talk about it. And so when you lose your job, you internalize it, you don't know who to speak to, you feel like you shouldn't speak and you can't speak, and you bottle it up, and then you feel alone and disconnected from people. And there's nothing you can do about it because you were taught that you can't, and so you become depressed. There's a lot of ways that people can become depressed. Now, it is a biological condition, and by that I mean it affects you biologically. It affects a lot of things. It affects your brain, it affects your hormones, it affects even how you move, right? So one of the symptoms of depression is that you become physically slower, like your limbs are heavy, like your body is heavy. And I personally have experienced that. When I started to recover from depression, I noticed that my face felt lighter and I was more able to smile. Like smiling was easier because it didn't feel like my cheeks were so heavy. And no, it's not a weight thing. I haven't really lost weight, in that time. So it was psychological, it was from depression. There are other symptoms. For example, we know scientifically that there are certain chemicals in the brain called neurotransmitters which might not be enough, and that's contributing to depression. One of the most common treatments for depression is medication, and one of the more famous medications that we know about nowadays involves serotonin. If you don't have enough serotonin, that's what we see in depressed people. So if you have serotonin pills, there is a very good chance that that is going to help you to feel better. And so we can see there's not enough serotonin in the brains of depressed people. We also know that the creation of new neurons is slower and lower in depressed people, so they have difficulty replacing the cells that die, which means that slowly their brain is kind of dying, essentially brain damage. And we know that memory is impaired, and even after you recover from depression, there might be entire periods that you basically have very little memory of, because you weren't creating new brain cells in order to store those memories in, you know. There's a lot of stuff. There is a lot of stuff, and it can even affect other parts of your body. One of the symptoms of depression is appetite, right? You could find yourself not eating enough or eating too much, you know. And for me, I was an overeater, and I would binge to feel better, and when I was depressed, my sense of taste was a lot weaker, so it took a lot more food, a lot more chocolate to make me feel better than it had before. Okay, that's not a healthy coping mechanism, I don't recommend it, but that's how it was for me, you know, and I tasted it way less. So that's part of why I overate, is I needed more to get the same effect. And that is something that we see in drug addicts as well. You know, over time they develop a tolerance, and they need more and more of the drug to get the same mood boost, the same high, the same whatever it is that the drug gives them. They need more and more and more and more and more. And that's part of addiction. And I guess in that way, overeating can be an addiction. But we'll set addiction to one side. That's a topic for another day. Another symptom of depression is fatigue. So you might find yourself being tired all the time. You might find yourself oversleeping, or you might find yourself undersleeping. Again, for me, I was never suicidal. I never experienced depression that intensely, but I definitely didn't enjoy being alive. I didn't really want to be awake and thinking and feeling, because everything sucked. You know, I was either numb and I couldn't feel anything and nothing gave me any joy, or I was actively unhappy, and both of those feelings were awful. And so for me, to sleep was to not have to experience what I was experiencing. Sleep was a break from my life. Sleep was a way to not have to face it, not have to think about it, not have to feel that way, and have a break, you know. And so I was an oversleeper. I think I've always been somebody who sleeps a lot, but there's a difference between being a person who needs a lot of sleep and being a person who's oversleeping because they can't bear to be awake and experience their life. There's a huge difference. And there's also the other side of the coin where you don't sleep enough. Maybe you keep yourself awake for days at a time. I don't really have experience of that. I guess there could be a fear of death. There could be maybe feeling like you can't get to sleep, like insomnia. There could be maybe feelings of I don't deserve to sleep. I haven't achieved anything today. I haven't done anything today because of depression. So I need to stay up until I get something done, and I don't deserve sleep yet. Or there could be a lot of other reasons. You know, I don't know what the reasons always are. They're very individual. I've tried to share my experience with you a little bit, but I haven't experienced all of the reverse of my symptoms. So, all right. So that was way longer than I intended. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making it to the end of the video.